Good morning, everyone. As promised, this is the chart set video for 14th of June 2021 with the prices as of last night's crossover at 000 UTC from the 13th of June to the 14th of June. Let's get to it. Disclaimer: the information displayed in this broadcast is known to cause increased amounts of FOMO. Wells only is alone and is not responsible for any losses you may accrue for having weak hands. What we're here to talk about are the proper financial strategies and explain, well, not so much the proper financial strategies, but just the proper financial mindset, as well as explaining why long-term thinking is beneficial to HEX or to holding HEX, and what that whole motion is all about, right? Because that's pretty much what's important. Why are we doing what we're doing? And let's start off, as always, with understanding at a very basic level what an economy is. No matter whether it's municipal or global, right, from the lowest level to the highest levels of an economy, everyone has to participate in that same economy, making it one economic pie. The only difference is what part of the pie you're in, right? But the pie really isn't 2D, right? It's really 3D because you're living it in real time at every level, right? Whether you're in your local hometown or traveling abroad, right? Each economy is going to be priced differently, and that's a function of these two items. How big is the public sector, i.e., government and the bureaucratic elements of a country, and how big is the private sector of a country, right? And the bigger public sector is, typically means the less well off the population is. And that's pretty much just how it's cut down. Because it's important to remember that the public sector, i.e., the government, can only attain revenue by taking it from those that create it. So it's important to remember that. Moving right along. All right, so here we have the first 546 days of Bitcoin, Ethereum, HEX, and T shares, and I've also overlaid it with a power trend line for both Ethereum and HEX T shares, so we can just see what the return stream nature is for each respective asset class. And the reason I highlight only only the T shares and the Ethereum coin is because Ethereum is a network upon which T shares and HEX are on. So I think it's important to highlight not only that we're outpacing Bitcoin because it still hasn't had a live transaction on its network yet. I think we have approximately 16 days left before we get a print here. But in the meanwhile, Ethereum is being significantly outpaced by HEX, and currently Ethereum is at 902 on the index, while HEX is at 38,953, rounding down. And I mean that's 4x, right? That's basic math right there. Function, and that just goes to show how HEX moves as a function of a square proportionally, right, with respect to Ethereum. So imagine where it's going to be return wise by the time we reach Ethereum's age, 5, 6 years from now, right? These are the things we have to think about when we're thinking long term, because at the end of the day, this power trend line is always going to be true, and this is why I have it on here to explain just that. This is the return nature of HEX. It's logarithm based too. If you're not in tune with what that is, please go to my first video. It's called "How Do Cryptos Work?" That explains everything you need to know about cryptos in general, and I do deep dive into HEX and how it functions there as well. So as I was saying, the trend line, right, highlights the return nature for both Ethereum and HEX and the T shares, respectively. Right. So when we're looking at one, this is log base 10. As we can see, the steepness is not as high as it is for the return streams for HEX, which is long base 2. Right. And this is what we want to highlight. Right. The longer we hold this rope in our back pocket, right, no matter when we enter, this value is always going to be higher because that's what this line is saying. Of course, it's saying that for Ethereum too, but the simple fact of the matter is that you want to own the best performing asset, right? We're not here to, you know, rest our laurels on ideology. We're here to make money. So I'm gonna pick the best horse race, horse in the race. So that's why we highlight HEX as being the outperformer in conjunction with T shares versus everything else, right? And we want to look at the top two. We don't really care about everything else because everything else is just going to play catch up anyway. So moving on to the next chart, and this is the post big payday chart. So on November 19th, 2020, that was the end of the launch phase for HEX. That is what was deemed big payday, and that was a day that all of the inflation came out of the HEX system. And with that, we got a nice price dump, right? And this is what we saw here. Actually, this was November 1st, and this was the dump into big payday. And this is the price action ever since. Um, the index is starting at 100, which means zero, right, for everything. And we've already outpaced not only the first Bitcoin halving, the second Bitcoin halving, but also the third. And we're 2x already, or 1x already on the Bitcoin halving. On the first one, sorry. That's phenomenal. Here we are waiting for it to happen a couple weeks ago, and now we're 2 times it, right? From 800 to 1600. I mean, that's 1x, right? But just to see the value be double is pretty significant. 1,629 on the index, 101% above the first big payday, 997% above the second, 619% above the third. I mean, this is just crazy. Crazy, crazy returns, crazy performance, crazy everything. And we're only 207 days post the big payday. We still have 155 days left in the year, calendar year, and crypto is 24/7. So there's no telling what this is going to end up looking like at the end of the year. It's going to be crazy to watch. Enjoyable, but crazy. All right, so now we're looking at T shares versus Ethereum, and T shares versus Bitcoin. Versus Ethereum is the pink line, versus Bitcoin is the orange line. The most recent max in terms of T shares versus Bitcoin is 4.11%, and for Ethereum is 61.5%. And the current reading as of last night's crossover was 60.4% for Ethereum and 3.9% versus Bitcoin. Now, why are we looking at this chart? The reason we're looking at this chart is very simple. The value proposition for HEX is pretty much its functionality, its utility. And that happens to be primarily tied to the T share. Now, what is a T share? A T share is what you obtain when you buy HEX and you stake it in order to earn yield. Right? And it's important to remember when you stake HEX, all you have to do is go to go.hex.com and make sure you end up in the stake tab and make sure you connect your MetaMask wallet so that you can then proceed to stake. Now, when you go to stake, you get to pick your duration. And the duration is the time you get to lock. You're choosing to lock the coins up. So if you're in the optionality ranges from 1 day all the way to 5,555 days, which is approximately 15.22 years. Now, here's the thing to understand. If you're less than 1 year, right, your APY is going to be one number. If you're less than 5 years, your APY is going to be another number. If you're at 15 years, 10 years or greater, specifically, your APY is going to be another number, right? And that's the important thing to understand. So when you're selecting your T shares, it's going to be with respect to that duration as well. And the way the system works is longer and bigger pays better. So what does that mean? If you use the staking functionality for HEX, and let's say you stake 50,000 coins versus 500,000, the amount of T shares you're going to receive are not going to be the same. And that's the bigger pays better functionality of the system. Now, the longer pays better functionality works like this. If you opt to stake either 50 or 500,000, right, HEX, the quantity of T shares is also going to be, or let me rephrase. If you decide to stake any quantity of HEX for 1, 5, or 10, 15 years, right, the yield for 1 year is going to be one number, and the yield for the 5 years is going to be another, and the yield for the 10 years is going to be another. And the reason for that is because of the T shares you're going to receive. Shorter stakes are going to receive the base number of T shares, whereas the longer you stake, the more T-shares you're going to receive in conjunction with how the system pays out those T-shares for the additional time. Because the system takes into account the duration when it's giving out the T-shares, i.e., what part of the pool or how much of the pool you're going to be able to lay a claim to. And that's how the proof of stake functionality works for HEX, is by the T-shares that you're obtaining. And this is the value proposition basically, right? So if the T-shares, which do have a dollar cost, keep going up in value because people keep ending stakes, because that's how the T-shares are repriced. They're repriced on the back end, i.e., when the stakes end, and that's what determines the value. These things are just going to keep going higher, right? And this is the value proposition for HEX, period. Because HEX follows the value proposition, right? It's this is the measuring rate for what it costs to obtain interest in the HEX system, and that's what HEX is about. So that's why T-shares matter. And here we have the dynamic HEX stock to flow tractor, which is tracking the dollar cost of T-shares, the dollar cost of 10,000 HEX, and we also throw the APY on there and obtain the T-share rate from these two, as the T-share rate is merely the division between, oh, this number is just crazy, the T-share rate and the cost of 10,000 HEX. Okay, so the T-share rate at the time of this crossover last night was $1,515. People, 90 days ago, or 100 days ago at this point, we were at 120, 130 bucks for a T-share. Um, this is crazy, right? This is wild, crazy. This 10x, no time. We've 10x from the November 1st top. We've 10x from the, what is this? Roundabout. This is November 1st. So that's 100 days later, 90 days. That January bottom, it looks like. January, February bottom, it looks like, right? I mean, HEX just doesn't fail to impress ever. And it continues to just outperform the market. T-share rate with respect to these price levels, 17,890 HEX, and it's close to it right now. I think at 17,882 or so HEX per T share. Then the APY for last night's payout was 41.31%. And we're just gonna keep going, right? This is the value proposition, and what's important to know, which we will end up seeing in this chart set, is that the T share rate, i.e., the dollar cost of a T share, and the dollar cost of HEX are pretty much perfectly correlated. 99.9 plus is the correlation between both, meaning the more end staking we have, i.e., the more activity we have in the system, the higher the valuation for the T-share is going to go, and in conjunction, the higher the valuation for HEX, because you need HEX in order to obtain a T-share, and that's why that's the value proposition, because in order to earn more HEX, you need to obtain T-shares. You can't earn more HEX by just merely buying and holding HEX. You'll get more fiat, sure, but you're not going to get more HEX. That only comes by owning T-shares. So here we have the payout per T-share sum line and the HEX index, and this chart is really just to highlight how the payout per T-share sum line, which is the number that you get when you own a T-share, this is the number that determines how many HEX you're getting per T-share. So what do I mean? Once you get HEX and you stake it, you are allotted a certain number of HEX per T-share. And that in the system is called the payout per T-share. So what I've done is I've taken the sum of all of those T-shares paid out to one T-share, or I'm sorry, I've taken the sum of all those HEX paid out to one T-share and summed them up, and this is the value since inception. It's 2,169.88 HEX for just staking one T-share since inception. And what's important to note is that price, as time progresses, is always trying to tag that payout per T-share sum line, because that is the value proposition for HEX. That is why people buy HEX. It's to stake it, to earn more HEX, to make more money, right? And if you guys go back to my previous videos, you'll see that price touches this line this whole time. And I even thought that price would reverse back because it was just high, right? Versus the payout per T-share sum line. But what's happened is that since the payout per T-share sum line is continuing to go up, so is price. So the question in my mind now becomes is well, does price keep tracking it hard like it's been? Because we used to have wider gyrations before, right? Once we would touch and bounce off the value proposition, but now the bounces are very shorter, very, very shorter, not long at all, right? We basically went from 30,000 on the index to approximately 17,000 on the index. But before, right, you would have way bigger moves on a percentage basis, right? And that's how you have to look at these things. It's not the nominal, i.e., the numerical move, but the percentage move, because that's how you measure that relative distance and make sure that you understand the impact of the move correctly. So as always, the hex index just keeps to just shoot to the stars, like no matter what, right? You see it fluctuates like everything else, but ultimately over time the trend is up and to the right, and that's a function of the value proposition, which is a payout per T share sum line. Now, what is this number in percentage terms? Because this is just a nominal 2,169.88 hex paid out per one T share, and this is essentially that number, 196,625%, because this is an index, and all indices start at 100 as a base zero, right? So all I'm doing here is just showing the index value of how price is changing over time in the system, right? And the payout per T share index has increased 5x or 4x since inception, because you have to subtract the 1. Because remember, 100 is 0 here when we're looking at an index. And the daily payout per index is at 18,900. Now, what system has increased its payout 180x since inception? Please let me know. I'd love to put my money there as well. Don't worry, I'll wait, because there isn't one. And that's the important thing to understand. You're not getting this kind of return anywhere in the market. And that's the key. That's the key. That's why the value proposition for Hex is the T share. That's why price continues to track it, because people are now understanding that. Earning interest is where it's at. Look at this, contractionary period that we've recently had in the crypto market. People are learning. People are learning. So here we have the payout metrics for the day. And actually, let me edit this because this is no bueno. Alright, guys, so we're back to it. I just had to make a quick change on the heading, the title of the chart. Just didn't like that title there. This chart doesn't really need a title anyway. It's pretty straightforward. It's giving us the graphical view of the daily payout that the system is generating. And as we know, there was a major hack yesterday that caused some crazy emergency end stakes, and about approximately 6 million hex were stolen from an individual, unfortunately. And as we can see, that is what promulgated this increase in the payout per T share. Um, it sucks that that happened to the individual, but luckily, given the way the system works, the culprit wasn't able to steal all of the gentleman's hex or the person's hex. I'm not sure if it was a guy or a girl, but they were only able to take away a small piece of the pie versus the big pie or the whole pie. And this is just, again, another security feature of the system. Imagine if that person would have been able to extract all of the value, right? No, instead, the person ended up relegating a big portion of that value to the staker class. And that's why the payout per T share jumped to levels not seen really in months, right? I can't remember the last time payout per T share was even greater than 6.2. And this is what we're seeing here, right? Like like I can't remember seeing a 6.3 payout per T share since I've been in Hex, maybe like a few days after I got in it, but that was it. Like never since. It's always been 6.2, 6.22 around there. So this is while a kind of a record-setting day, it set records in the wrong way, unfortunately. Um, we still have and this is kind of how that's shown, right? We still have total T shares at 11.04 million. If you want to look at it like that, rounding up. Daily payout increased due to 6 million hex getting stolen in emergency unstake. So sad, but record-setting at the same time. And this is just a function of Hex's security. All right, so now we're going to go into these expiring shares charts, and what I want to highlight It's just how the end staking, right? Um, and the staking. Because here's the thing: the short stakes are what's driving up the T-share rate so fast, right? Last month we were at 17,600 hex per T-share. Now we're pretty much at 17,900 hex per T-share, and it's not slowing down because, as you guys can see, the weight of the staking across the curve is primarily on the front end, right? We got 50% or so, or 45, 44% or so in June for the 8th of June, and we have about 23% in the month of July, right? So that's a big chunk of the proportionality of the stakes being in these two front months, right? 70% in aggregate. But you have to remember each month is 100, right? So we're looking at all of the expiring shares for that respective month are being tracked at being at 50% for this time frame, right? So that's a big chunk of stakes being entered now that are ending now, so to speak, right? Like that's one way to look at it. And as we go across time, right, we're going from 6.8 to 6.10, dropped a little bit. July increased a little bit. We went from 22% to about 25, right? So 44 for June, 25 for July, a couple of days later, 10th of June. And then we see a pretty sizable increase in the 12th, up to about 47%, which is pretty sizable. And July looks like it increases to approximately 27% or so. So again, the stakes are getting up there, and as you guys can see, the activity in the further back, but front months are also increasing, right, over time. And this is as of last night. Not much change in the front end. That is June. Um, Not much change in July either. So from the day before to yesterday, not much change. So we'll keep an eye on it and see how this continues to progress over the month. This is again what drives the T-share rate up, right? These short stakes, because they end now, they don't end later, and the functionality of the T-share rate reset, right? The ratcheting up of that T-share rate is a function of the end staking strictly, right? So what does that mean? Every time a stake is ended, that is what ultimately reprices. And let's go up here just to look at this chart or look at this line. That is what ultimately reprices the T-share rate. So how is that? Well, when a stake is ended, a person has X number of T-shares. So what the system ends up doing is it takes into account how big the person's stake was in conjunction with how long the person's stake was, which is succinctly described as the ROI. The system is going to take a look at the ROI and gauge what the scaling should be, or the normalization of the T shares is going to be if the person opts to restake what they just received, right? Because over time the system is paying out that hex, right? It's paying out the hex is being earned over time, whereas at least it's tabulating it, it's accounting for it. And then at the end of the stake, what happens is that everything is actually minted, and that is when the inflation actually happens, right? That's when you get these moves that push price higher, because you're increasing the valuation in the system, right? So then the system has to adjust with that. And this is what we end up seeing in the T-share rate, because it then becomes more expensive to obtain a T-share for that specific actor, right? And this is why we look at the short stakes and what's happening there, because we want to have an idea, right, of the moves that are coming. So this is the correlation chart between Ethereum and HEX, or I'm sorry, Ethereum and Bitcoin versus HEX. And the important thing to realize is that HEX is on the x-axis for both, and Bitcoin and Ethereum are on the y-axis for both. Now, the important thing also to highlight here is the grouping. HEX is primarily on the positive side of the x-axis for versus both Ethereum and Bitcoin. And the thing to note for Bitcoin and Ethereum is that their scatter plot, right, like where their returns lie, are very widespread, right? They're not primarily on the positive side of the y-axis, nor primarily on the negative side of the y-axis, right? And that's the thing. You want a positively skewed return when you want to invest in something. So when a professional sits down and takes a look at HEX versus the rest, this is what they're going to see. Pretty simple, right? The correlation is zero because Hex is decorrelated by from everything. It's decorrelated from Hex or Bitcoin, and it's decorrelated from Ethereum. And as we can see here, the correlation number is 0.0027, and for Ethereum is 0.0002. Now, if you're not aware of what a correlation is and need to know more, please go to my YouTube channel and check out the video I just did on correlations. It's under the Hex macro playlist, so you can find it there. It's one of the most recent ones. It might have been the one I did last week or something, so it's relatively recent. You won't have to dig too far. Um, all right, so here we have the rolling correlations chart, and the price is as of the day before, 612. No, at the crossover, 612 to 613. But the thing about it is that it doesn't matter anymore. Until this number changes up here, the correlation, there's really no reason to keep updating this. You just need to know that the correlation is positive to the point that it's almost 1, because 100% on the correlation scale is the same as 1, right? Because 100%, you're looking at how many cents you have per that 1. That's why 1%, 100%, right? You're looking at any value per cent, and that's where that phrase comes from. So as you look at the time scale here, we see that from mid-May, it's pretty much been 99.9% correlation nonstop. No deviation from that. So as long as this continues to be the case, we can expect this to continue to be the case. So the price as of last night's crossover was 8.468 cents. I mean, this is just crazy. Payout per T share at 53.8 cents with respect to the 6.35 hex payout that we had last night, giving us an adjusted hex value of 62.26 cents, which is essentially the future valuation of hex. And as we can see, anytime we traverse a specific level, as far as future valuation goes, seems like price just goes there, right? And ultimately just pauses and does the same thing again. And that next level that we've seen here recently was 40 cents or so. So it'd be interesting to see if Hex just does continue to follow that value proposition as the standard level to consolidate at, because that's what it's been doing this whole time, right? Did it here, did it here. Seems like it did it here. So let's see if it does it again here, right? Next stop, 40 cents. Let's see. It would be great to see that. All right, and here is the HEX PE chart, and as you guys know, this is being looked at as 1 hex divided by the amount of hex you're receiving per payout, right? We're not looking at the dollar valuation here. We're looking at just strictly the value proposition that hex is providing. And in line with last night's damn near record-setting payout, the HEX to PE ratio is now at 15.75%, basically, which is ridiculously low relative to the S&P 500's price to earnings ratio, which has an all-time low that's recorded of 551%, which occurred during World War I. So those are things to think about in line with the fact that this is where we're at, right? And now this chart is a comparison chart between Apple, Microsoft, Google, and Bitcoin. And this chart is just to highlight what the network effect looks like. I go into this in detail in my first few series of videos. So please check them out if you're not in tune with the network effect and how markets actually work over time. You'll be glad that you did. And if you want to follow me on YouTube, it is at youtube.com/whales only. On Telegram at t.me/whales only. And on Twitter, I am found at whales only with the number 1 at the end of it. So it's like this here on Twitter, just add the number 1 at the end. Thank you guys for watching. Whales out.